Welcome back, everyone, to the Millennial Button Mashers Podcast. Summer Game Fest 2026 is officially in the books, and while there were a ton of announcements throughout the showcase, there were about 5 games in particular that really stood out to me personally. Some of them were expected, some of them completely surprised me, and a couple have quickly become games that I can't stop thinking about. Today, we're going to talk about Lords of the Fallen 2, The Last Ronin, Resident Evil Veronica, Gundam Rogue Orbit, and Into the Unwell. Then at the end, I'll talk about the 2 games that left the biggest impression on me in my overall takeaway from Summer Games Fest 2026. With that, let's jump in. All right, so brief disclaimer, we're not going to be talking about the entirety of the Summer Game Fest because there was a ton of announcements, big and small, and potentially not necessarily announcements, but updates. So some of those will be sprinkled in through here, but I definitely recommend if you guys want a full breakdown, go to GameSpot or other YouTube channels because they've done a really good job at breaking down all the different aspects of what actually happened during Summer Games Fest, because there was quite a lot, especially if you got to catch the Jeff Keighley live award show. Well, not award show, but the actual show itself. There were a ton of announcements in there. So definitely go through, do your due diligence, because this is just my personal opinions on what caught my eye personally. All right, so the first one that I want to talk about is actually Lords of the Fallen 2. Now, if you guys have been listening to this podcast for quite some time, you guys know that Bloodborne is one of my all-time favorite games, and I love the Souls-like genre. I do feel like it's a little overcrowded, but I feel like Lords of the Fallen specifically has done a good job of delineating itself in such a jam-packed category. And I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment with this, because you know how brutally difficult Souls-like games can be. But I love what they're trying to do here. From the looks of it, the game looks a lot more fast-paced. It seems much more aligned with what made games like Bloodborne and Elden Ring so successful. And one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard from the previous game, and I had this experience as well, was that the combat seemed a little clunky and a little heavy. And based on what we saw during Summer Games Fest, which I have up on the screen for those video listeners, we can see that the team has taken that feedback to heart. Movement appears more fluid, the combat seems a little bit more aggressive, and overall the game just seems a lot faster paced. The dual world mechanic also appears to be returning, which is what makes this game in the Souls-like category actually unique and stand out from other Souls-likes that are currently on the market. But I think the challenge with this game isn't necessarily the quality, because you could see that this is going to be a very cinematic game and very pretty. It's actually going to be the timing that I think is going to be difficult for this one. Right now, the game is targeting fall 2026. And if you've been paying attention to the release cycle, especially with what just happened in Summer's Games Fest, Xbox Showcase, plus the Sony State of Play, there are a lot of games that are coming out in this fall. And I would say it's just going to be a jam-packed release calendar. September through November, really, again, looking very packed so far. So while I am excited about what I saw, my biggest concern is whether this game can avoid getting buried under the larger releases. Still, this was one of my favorite reveals of the show, and I'll definitely be keeping my eye on it. One personal anecdote, though, just to go back to my experience with the Souls-like genre, this has been something that I've been playing for 10 plus years now. Dark Souls 3 was actually the first foray I had into this category. And I think what keeps me coming back to the Souls-like genre in general is a couple things. I think the boss designs and their unique art style of these games really keeps me coming back. I'm a big fan of Gothic style art styles too, and you could see the Lords of the Fallen definitely plays into that. Obviously, Bloodborne does as well. And I think the other thing too is how difficult these bosses are and their unique mechanics that each one has. And just the level of progression you can see when you fight them each time. Because unless you're really, really good at these games, you're going to be fighting these bosses multiple times. So it's very cool. And I think part of the thing that keeps me coming back to this genre is the brutal hardness, to be completely frank, but also the reward and that dopamine hit that you frankly get when you beat these impossible bosses. So that's why I'm excited about something like this, because we can't expect From Software to be the only one that's good at this category. So I'm hoping that Lords of the Fallen 2 will do justice to this, because I think the first one was good. Again, it had a lot of the right things in place. It was just a little bit slow. So I'm hoping that this team takes all the feedback that they got and are able to, take that and make this even better so that they can revitalize this old franchise. Speaking of franchises getting a fresh take, let's talk about a game that could end up being one of the most ambitious Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle projects we've ever seen. All right, so this is a new game in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle universe, and it immediately got my attention. It's called The Last Ronin. This one has a lot of potential to be really cool because PlatinumGames are at the helm for developing this, and they're creators of the famous Bayonetta series as well as Nier Automata. And they also are working alongside Paramount on this specific project. Now, I do have one major complaint about this reveal. We basically got nothing. All you can see is a sewer, a manhole cover, some atmosphere, and a silhouette of our protagonist. But really, that's it. But after digging into some details that surfaced afterward, my excitement level started climbing pretty quickly. The game is reportedly being developed as a AAA single-player action RPG inspired by the modern Game of War mechanics. For those unfamiliar with the source material, The Last Ronin follows Michelangelo as the last surviving Ninja Turtle in a dark future where his brothers, Splinter, and much of his family have been killed. The game is expected to take place in a futuristic cyberpunk version of New York City, controlled by the Foot Clan, which creates a much darker setting than we've seen previously in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, at least as of late. But what makes this especially interesting is PlatinumGames' involvement. When I think of Platinum, I think of the incredible combat systems that they had in Bayonetta and Nier, and the fast-paced action that they do exceptionally well. The biggest question I have is whether they can also deliver that emotional storytelling that a game like this was going to need to be successful. Because if they can pull off both, this has the potential to become one of the best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games ever made. It's still a long way out because, as you can see on the trailer if you're watching, there's a potential of a 2028 release window. But I wouldn't hold my breath because this one looks like it's very early stages, but is exciting nonetheless that this is coming to fruition. And I have to just say, personally, I think, Michelangelo being at the helm here and having all the previous Ninja Turtles equipment that he can have readily at his disposal is awesome. But personally, when I was growing up, I loved Leonardo, just having the blue. Blue was my favorite color growing up, still kind of is. But, I wish there would be, or maybe there will be, some throwbacks to the brothers that aren't able to be in this one as well. So we'll see. But let me know what your favorite turtle is too. It'd just be interesting to hear that as well. Now let's move on to a game that's easily my favorite announcement of Summer Games Fest. All right. So this one was our opener for Summer Games Fest, and I was absolutely stoked to see this. Okay, so this is Resident Evil Veronica. I've never played the original Code Veronica, but as someone who has become much bigger into the Resident Evil series over the last few years, I'm excited to finally experience this story in a modern format. This remake has been rumored for years, and every time Capcom announced another remake, fans kept asking the same question. When are we getting Code Veronica? Now, we finally have our answer. What makes this announcement especially important is that Code Veronica contains some of the major story developments for both Claire and Chris Redfield and is considered one of the most important entries in this franchise overall. Capcom has also had tremendous success lately with projects like the previous Resident Evil Requiem earlier this year, as well as Pragmata. And we've also gotten really good remakes from Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4. And so even beyond Resident Evil, Capcom, again, has been on an incredible run, just doing great work over the last couple of years. So if Veronica gets the same level of care and attention, I think we're looking at one of the biggest releases of 2027. This was my favorite reveal of the show, and I can't wait to see more. Now let's transition from zombies to giant robots. All right, so for this next game, we're getting a new action game in the Gundam universe called Gundam Rogue Orbit. And I wouldn't say this necessarily was on my bingo card heading into the Summer Game Fest, but it definitely caught my attention. One of the first things that came to mind while watching the trailer was actually Armored Core 6, which was recently released by From Software, I believe back in 2023, and kind of has the same vibe to this. But the combat that we saw here looks fast, the movement looks fluid, and the scale looks extremely impressive. What I found most interesting was this appears to be a standalone story, meaning newcomers won't need to have years of Gundam experience or knowledge to jump in. And frankly, I think that's a huge win because one of the biggest barriers to entry for the Gundam series has always been the sheer amount of lore attached to this franchise. And I think if Bandai Namco can create an approachable entry point while still delivering satisfying mech combat, I think this could end up being a sleeper hit. Right now, it's targeting a 2027 release, and while we'll still need more from the gameplay department, this was definitely one of the biggest surprises of the show for me. And now, personally, I haven't played Armored Core 6. I just never have been necessarily into the mech-like fighting mechanic, and you're probably thinking, Dylan, why are you highlighting this then? I'm highlighting it because Gundam actually has a little bit of a personal history with me growing up. I actually spent a couple of years of my life with my brother, my older brother, trying to be cool with him, watching Gundam on Cartoon Network. So having this story and this IP be revitalized in a way that I think I'll actually pick up this time is compelling for me. And so that's why I'm most interested in this, because I've always found the Gundam lore and the Gundam TV show, frankly, back in the day, very interesting. So I'm interested to see if maybe that's the olive branch that gets me into this game specifically. So we'll see. But finally, I want to talk about one of the most visually unique games that's currently under development that was not talked about during Summer Games Fest, but at Day of the Devs. All right. So again, this wasn't technically a new announcement. It wasn't part of the live show, but it was great to see this show up again. So this is Into the Unwell, and it continues to be one of the most visually distinct games being developed right now. The Roberhose art style immediately grabs your attention and makes it stand out in a sea of games that often look very similar, especially in the 3D platforming environment. But the best way I can describe this is it's a combination of the mouse PI for hire that we recently got with that Roberhose animation style. I'd mix it also with Spyro as well as Ratchet and Clank when we think about the old cartoon-like 3D platformers, and maybe a little bit of old school cartoon insanity thrown into the mix. This game does three things here. Blends third-person platforming, roguelike progression, and co-op gameplay for up to 3 players. Now, what I appreciate most is that it knows exactly what it wants to be. It isn't trying to be the next massive live service game. It's not chasing trends. It's simply trying to create something unique and fun. And sometimes that's enough. That fun factor is what's going to get me hooked. It's going to make me have a positive impression of the game. And sometimes that's enough, right? This game is currently targeting a 2027 release and remains one of the more interesting indie projects that's currently on my radar. And again, you guys know that 3D platforming is one of my favorite genres of all time, going back to Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. And while that's not necessarily what we're seeing here necessarily, it's kind of similar in that vein of a unique art style and a cartoony 3D platformer. And I'm interested to see as well how they plug in the roguelike mechanics. That way it changes each run every single time. I think that'll be a unique spin up of the 3D platforming genre and mixing it with the roguelike genre as well. Now, after everything we saw at Summer Games Fest, there were 2 games that continue to stick out to me personally. I think the first, and I think a lot of people will agree with me here, is Resident Evil Veronica. This feels like the safest bet of the entire showcase because Capcom has proven they know how to modernize classic games while still respecting what made them special in the first place. And the second is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin. This one has the highest ceiling, in my opinion. A darker TMNT story, a cyberpunk setting, PlatinumGames at the helm here, and an inspiration from the God of War franchise. That's a combination that has the potential to be something really, really special, especially if they can almost do something like the Batman Arkham series, how dark that was, and then they can make it into the TMNT universe. I think this could be a match made in heaven. And that's why this one is the game that I'm probably the most confident will be great, because there's a lot of good developers involved. There's also a lot of good backing with Paramount. And so I think this will be one of the games of the year that year when it releases in 2028. Of course, hoping that nothing changes with anything that comes with that development cycle. All right. And so my biggest takeaways from Summer Game Fest, I think from Summer Game Fest 2026, you could see that publishers are increasingly interested in revisiting older franchises that they have in their portfolio and revitalizing them. If you go back to the example with Resident Evil Veronica, The Last Ronin, or even Lords of the Fallen, there seems to be growing recognition that players want modern versions of games and franchises they've loved for years. The challenge is making sure that those games evolve instead of simply relying on nostalgia alone. Based on what we saw, though, I think several developers are on the right track. So those were my major takeaways from Summer Game Fest 2026. Now I would like to hear from all of you. What was your favorite announcement from the show? Which game are you most excited for? What do you think I personally missed? I know there was a ton of releases plugged in there. I didn't watch all the Day of the Devs announcements, so I'm going to personally fall on the sword there. I just saw a couple things, but I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, follow the podcast wherever you get your content, and thank you all for listening. Stay safe, stay gaming.